Okay, we are holding at the penultimate paragraph on Omid Mem Tes. So we're now going to start a very geschmacke section of the Maimah. And I want you to be aware how moving forward, the second half of the Maimah of ve-Aravah and the whole of the Yom Hashmini Atzeres are, in my opinion, the most difficult parts of the hemshekh to understand. Not because they're not well explained. It's fully explained. There's an arichas habir. You're given, it's not terse and limited and difficult to read. What it wants to say, it says very clearly. But the concepts are difficult. It's tifa inyonim, deep inyonim. It's not difficult in the sense the way Yechayenu Miyimayim was difficult. Yechayenu Miyimayim was a difficult maimah because it was there was a lack of explanation. It was under-explained. There was a lot of complicated, technical, Kabbalistic language. And so all in all, it was a difficult maimah to read through. But the concepts in Yechayenu Miyimayim were not particularly difficult. They were fundamentally the same concepts that were very well explained in Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah. And as long as you understood Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah well, you were able, with a little bit of a dictionary and some hard work, to make you to work your way through Yechayenu Miyimayim. So it wasn't conceptually difficult. It was just difficult to read. Lulav ve-Aravah and Yom Hashmini Atzeres are relatively easy to read. They're very long and well explained, but the concepts are demanding. It requires a lot of reflection and thinking about how these concepts work. And even though the Maimorim towards the end of the hemshekh, so from Lech Lecha and Vayera, Pokadato and Lechol Tichla, are usually conceived of as difficult Maimorim. If you learn Lulav ve-Aravah and Yom Hashmini Atzeres well, you can understand the end of the hemshekh better, or much more easily. The end of the hemshekh is less introduction of new concepts. It's the spelling out of something which you should already have understood well from these two Maimorim. So there is what I'm saying is it requires a lot of focus and attention to be able to process the ideas that are being communicated. But he helps by Pashat explaining it by arichas, but you need to pay attention quite a lot. So where are we? The purpose of this section of the hemshekh, from Shuvi Yisrael, Lulav ve-Aravah, Yom Hashmini Atzeres, is to try to understand better what it meant in the Medrash when it said that initially Hashem wanted to create the world in Midas Hadin. What is the basis? What is the reason behind Hashem's desire to create the world in Midas Hadin? So first of all, we explain what creating the world in Midas Hadin looks like. So in Shuvi Yisrael, we said creating the world in Midas Hadin means an intense divine presence. So Hashem pays very close attention to every single detail. What that does is it elicits obedience, and more than that, it also elicits in a person the opportunity to have a perfect type of Avodah, which is the Avodah that comes from smel deicha, from self-critique, self-analysis, which, when a person has the awareness of their own inadequacies, that helps them reach the Rosh Hashanah, the Etzem Neshama, and which then brings about the whole purpose of creation. That through the Etzem Neshama you can be mamshekh atzm serim seif, and you can make a dirah b'tachtenim. That's what we said in Shuvi Yisrael. Lulav ve-Aravah gave us a different pshat, which is on the completely other side of the scale. Instead of it meaning creation, Midas Hadin means Hashem's attentiveness and a strict focus on people's behavior. It is more of a reflection of Hashem's strictness with Himself, meaning Hashem's tzimtzum and restriction and concealment and hel and behester, that through midas hadin Hashem conceals Himself, which enables there to be a yesh v'davar nifrad, and then the yesh v'davar nifrad is able to ensure that Hashem could be a melech al-am, that Hashem could be a king over a separate entity. Because if there wasn't a separate entity, there would be no tainug b'melucha. Hashem would get no pleasure out of the whole notion of creation, because everything would be bottled to Him. Wanted it to be yesh v'davar nifrad, and then those dvarim nifradim would become bottled to Him with Kabbalah soil. So there has to be dvarim nifradim. How do you create dvarim nifradim? So we explained the difference between Atzilus and the difference between Biyah. In Atzilus, everything is miyuchad v'delikus, everything yivach hadivik muichad dveikus ha'ara ve'ein amoir, all of those things. That was Atzilus. But in Biyah, then Nivraim, Nifradim, dvarim nifradim. How's that possible? Because of Malchus Atzilus. So till now, what we've been explaining is Malchus Atzilus is al derech dibur ha'elyin. So we understand that dibur, the Gabi Azulas, is a complete helen behester. And similarly, the Eir in Seif, the Eir of Atzilus, is completely nis'alim, is completely concealed through the Asius of dibur ha'elyin of Malchus, then there's a parsa, and that enables that there should be the Dvarim Nifradim. Okay? All of this we pegged onto the Pasuk, we're now going to go further, and we're going to ask we're going to explain or expound, how is it possible for the Oisius to be able to conceal the Eir? How can the Kalim conceal the Eir? How does that work? What is the process in which a Helen Vehester is able to conceal an Eir of Eir Seif? Now, till now, especially under the influence of the first two Maimarim, what would we say? We would say, it's the Kayach of the Keli. The Keli can do anything. Keli has a Shadish Elyon, right? But we're gonna have a much more complex explanation of the relationship between the Eir and the Kli, the Gilui and the Helen, and how they interact with each other. Because in fact, what we're going to say, that in order for there to be a Keli, that's facilitated by the Eir. The Eir, by the Eir, through its own tzimtzum and Helen, enables there to be the function of the Keli. So what I want you to think about in this concept is that till now we've sort of talked about Eirus and Kalim, or Mashpia Makabel. Let's say Mashpia Makabel, because Mashpia Makabel covers, I suppose, all of the issues that we come up. Isha, Seichel, Dibur, Torah, Yisrael, all of the pairings that we discussed in the first two Maimarim. You've got Mashpia or Makabel. Let's just say Mashpia or Makabel. The way we've sort of thought about it is, we said, well, in the Seder Vishtalshus, in the sort of the hierarchy as it exists, the Mashpia is the Elyon and the Makabel is the Tachtin. There's a hierarchical relationship. One is an Elyon and one is a Tachtin. The Mashpia is Mashpia into the Makabel. But we discovered that the Makabel is able to have a hashpah on the Mashpia, which would seemingly be unnatural in a sort of a hierarchical system. It doesn't automatically lend itself to think that's possible, because if the Makabel has got everything the Makabel has is from the Mashpia, then why is the makabel able to have an impact and an effect on the mashpia? So we explained that there's a sheirish elyon, there's a sheirish omuk, there's a much deeper sheirish of the makabel than the mashpia. And that enables it to have an impact on the mashpia. But in all that conversation, we're sort of treating them as very separate things. In the sheirish elyon, if you go back to the very beginning, what is a mashpia? Mashpia is the koach hagilui. It's giluyim, right? It's the koach hagilui. And what is the makabel? The koach hakbola, the koach hahelem. One is the koach habligavul, one is the koach hagvul. They're two koachas. Whose koachas are they? The Eibishter's koachas. The Eibishter has these koachas. The two koachas of the Eibishter. So, in the Eibishter himself, later on in the hemshekh, we'll have a discussion about whether you can, whether we can sort of determine a sort of a kedima of one over the other. But practically speaking, when Hashem has these yichelos, this ability to be begilui or behelem, these are keiches of Hashem. These are keiches which Hashem has, right? Kol zman the Eirin Seif habli gevul, the keich hagilui, the mashpia, is dominant or is expressed, is begilui. It overshadows, it ignores, it undermines the keich hagvul. Keich hagvul becomes insignificant or sort of overlooked, forgotten. In the presence, in the context of the Eirin Seif Abligable, whole notion of Eirin Seif Abligable is this pashtus, is gilui and everything, and the Eirin Seif Agvul is a steering to it, is an interference to it. So it overwhelms it. And it's only through the sort of the holding back or the restraining of the Eirin Seif Abligable where the Eirin Seif Agvul is able to emerge and function and operate. So you might want to consider it and sort of, instead of conceiving it as which you may have thought about, my head I think about it, you know how English, there's English taps and American taps is a usual example, even though now we use American taps as well. But in the past, in the English taps, you had the hot water in one tap and the cold water in another tap. They were separate taps. Whereas in the American taps, you have it all coming through one faucet, and you have to do a meziga. It has to be measured. But to think about these keiches not so much as coming out of two separate makedos, but them coming from the same place, emerging from the same place. And then it's a matter in which, if you want to, the greater extent to which you're mitzamtzing, you restrict one thing, it enables the other thing to emerge much stronger, be it hot or cold, like we have in our mashal of the cases, the hot water and the cold water. If you want to have the cold water, or the hot water, depends how you're going to work the mashal, of Hagbola, then you need to have a tzimtzum and a constraint on the Eirin Seif Abligable. And we're going to use the mashal of Dibur again to explain that. Okay? So that's a sort of a hakdama of what we're getting into, and let's see how it spells out. So on Amud Memtes, penultimate paragraph. This is what it says in the pasuk in Ashrei Tilim, that Kavod Malchus Chayimeru. So we already have talked about Kavod as Kavod being Malchus, right? So we say Baruch Kavod Hashem Im Kaimai, we say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Eilam Vayed. We're talking about Malchus, and Dafka the Chitzonius of Malchus, the Dibur of Malchus. the Levush of Malchus. Kavod Malchuscha Yemeru. They talk about, meaning they give praise to Kavod Malchuscha, the honor of your sovereignty, your kingdom, your kingship. Ugvurasecha Yedaberu, and your might they also talk about. So this posuk is a reference to Malchus of Atzilus, which becomes the origin and the source of Eilam Biyah, like we've explained above. So the posuk is describing how the creations of Biyah praise Malchus of Atzilus. Kavod Malchuscha Yemeru ugvurascha Yedaberu. So that's it's going to spell out how you touch up the pasuk. The chol b'chinas ha'amirah hilul shalahem hu b'chinas kavod malchus b'lbad. The nivroim of Biyah have a complete helen behester of the Eid of Atzilus. All they know of, all they're able to be mishabeach, is kavod malchus itself, the levush of malchus. Hainu b'chinas ha'levush of malchus. Because that is the source of their creations. That's what they're aware of. The Helen Behester of Malchus of Atzilus, the Dibur, the Levush, or Kanal this Havusam liyos b'chinas yesh zel b'chinas eisis hadibur davka. As we've explained at length above, how the production, the creation of Eilam Biyah is a product of the letters of speech of Dibur Elin of Malchus of Atzilus. To liyosam eisis b'chinas yesh. Since the Oisios of Malchus Atzilus are Oisios, Murgoshim, Oisios of Yash, Dibur is, as opposed to a Machshava, is Oisios which are Murgoshim, are felt, are sensed. Hari Hendu V'chinas Levush HaMaster, that Yeshus of the Oisios of Malchus Atzilus serves as a concealment of the Eirus of Atzilus, in order that there should be able to be the creation. Okay, so that's just taking the pasuk and applying it to the biur that we've given till now. Yes? But now he goes further. However, what it says afterwards is they further give praise to the concept of gvura. This second part of the pasuk explains why the oisios of Malchus of Atzilus are in a state of yeshus, such that they're able to conceal the Eid of Atzilus and create Eilam Biyah. It's as a result of the Eibishter's Gevura. What is the Eibishter's Gevura in this sense? B'chinas ha'gvuros de Zah. The Gevura of Zah. So till now we've had a contrast. We're not talking about Oiris and Kalim as our Mashpia Makabel. Our Mashpia Makabel is Zah and Malchus, right? So Malchus is the Makabel. Malchus is the Asius, which are B'chinas Doiming, like we said over here. In this part of the page. Here, just right here. Shem B'chinas Doiming. Right there, Makabel. Remember, they're a Doiming. The Oisius B'chinas Yesh, we said. And the Mashpia is Zah. So in the pasuk we say Ugvuraschi Daberu. They praise. They give an explanation of why Kavod Malchuscha. Why is there able to be a Kavod Malchuscha? Why is there able to be Oisius Hadibur, Oisius Murgoshim, Oisius B'chinas Yesh? They're able to be Ma'alim Master on the Erev Atzilus and enable the creation of Biyah. That's because, not because they it's automatically the case. What facilitates their Yeshus is B'chinas Hagvuris de Zah. Zah itself is the reason why Malchus is able to do what Malchus does. And specifically the Gvura of Zah. Uka Yudua. Now we're going to say just some technical stuff before we get into the Biyah. Kiyudua, the Binyan HaMalchus mi Hagvuris. When we talk about Binyan HaMalchus, the necessity that Malchus should be constructed by the other spheres, the process of construction is from the Gevuris. By Inyanu, the Sibus Yeshus Ha'esius, who Hagvuris Vatimsum Shala Oir. So this is the main point. The reason why the Ha'esius of Malchus Vatzilus Abu Bechinas Yesh, what do you mean Bechinas Yesh? Yesh means they have the capacity to be Mailim or master on the Oir, is because of the Gevuris and the Tzimtzumim of the Oir. The Oir is the cause of their emergence as Eisiyos Mogoshim. We said before, there are different types of Eisiyos. We have Eisiyos Machshava. Eisiyos Machshava are not Eisiyos B'Bechinas Yesh. Just like in the Moshel of Eisiyos Machshava, they're Tomid, they're B'Bechinas Pnimi, they're Einam Yotzim B'Chutz. Right? When we wanted to describe the fundamental difference, when we wanted to explain the fundamental difference to Eisiyos Eisiyos Machshava, we said over here on Amud Mem Zayin, the fundamental difference in Eisiyos Adibon and Eisiyos Machshav is what the Etzem Eisiyos, the Eisiyos themselves. Eisiyos Machshav Mechin is Heder HaYeshus Adayin. All of the difference in Dibra and Machshava, the one is Pnimi, one is Chitzoni, one is Tomid, one is Esadabe, is Lachus Miladabe. All those differences are as a result of what? The Eisiyos of Machshava are Behed HaYeshus, Eisiyos Adibra have Yeshus. Now what we're saying is, why do the Eisiyos Adibra have Yeshus? Is it just that's what they are? Some things have Yeshus and don't have Yeshus. You've got to understand this is a Bechina in Nefesh. Your Nefesh, how comes your Nefesh is able, which is, the Nefesh itself is Elokus, Chelik Elikam Yal Mamish, Keiches HaNefesh, and Nafshiyim we described. Yeah? All of a sudden, even Machshava is still Einam Bechinas Yeshus. All of a sudden, Dibur is Bechinas Yeshus. How does that happen? You've stated why they're different. We know they're different. We know why Eilam Biyah is plausible and is viable is because the Eisiyos Adibur of Malchus Vatzilus, that the Makabel of Malchus Vatzilus is able to be Mailim or Master on the Eish Mailim Imeno. But how comes Malchus Vatzilus has this Yeshus? Where does that Yeshus come from? To explain that it comes from the Gevuros and Tzimtzumim of the Eir. The Gevuros and Tzimtzumim of the Eir facilitate, not the pshat that it sort of invents the yeshus of the it enables the yeshus of these Eisiyos to emerge. Remember what I said before, the moshel of the sink. If you remove the cold water, then the hot water can be more dominant. If you and vice versa, yes. So similarly over here, if you remove the intensity of the oil, if you make the oil more mitzumsum mugbul, then it emerges this other koyach eliki, this koyach agvul, the koyach helen, which is manifest in the yeshus of Malchus of Atzilus, the yeshus of the Eisiyos of Malchus of Atzilus. Sha'yidei sha'oidim is samsim, be'eni mei begilui, al-yidei zen nasim ha'Eisiyos b'chinas yesh. Then the Eisiyos are able to be in a state of yesh. But be clear, they don't invent the yeshus of it. It's not a product. It's not an ilava olul. It's more that the restraining and the constraining of this oil enables the emergence of this yeshus, which can then be mailim u'masli on the oil gamri. Okay. Now the bi'ur. Truth is, the bi'ur inyan is quite. This is it's a bit harder. The real bi'ur is going to come on the next page on that Amud and Aleph. But we'll start the bi'ur inyan, and see how that pans out. You ready? Amud Nun. Are you with me? It's important to have set up at the beginning what we're trying to do, and understand the importance of this, and how it's definitely not the, if you think in the first Maimorim of Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah and Yichayim Yumayim, it's painting everything in much broader strokes. You got Mashpia, you got Makabel, and they're seen as very distinct entities. And we were talking about their interaction. Now we're going in a much more subtle way to explain how the functioning of the Makabel is dependent on the manner of the Mashpia. We said earlier that it's, Malchus is Mamshach Kesel. It's the way that the Makabel is poil, that there should be a hashpah atzmis from the Mashpia. Everything was all about the Mashpia, the Makabel influencing the Mashpia. But now there's going to be a much stronger emphasis on the influence of the Mashpia on the Makabel. And that's why you really have to, in order to be able to get the punchline at the end in the Chol Tichla, you have to have this component as well. Otherwise the whole thing won't fit together and you're going to struggle later. Actually, there's a very difficult shtickle in Yichayim Yumayim where this is, and I think I mentioned it when we were learning it, where a lot of these inyonim is being talked about very, very bekitza. Omid Yudalit. Omid Yudalit Tesvav. But this is there it's in Isis HaKabbalah, here it's spelled out in Muchsindas Isis. Ubirin in Yuvan al Pimash Kosu Bidruzutza Dafri Tadik Heyomet Beis. Be'inyan Isis Ach He. Aleph Ches He Ayin. So, in the Zayar, remember I said to you in the earlier shir, there's the Idraba, there's the Idrazuta. The Idrazuta is in the end of, in Chelik Gimel of the Zayar, which is in Pashas Hazinu, which was the final Idra, the final gathering, which was in Shulta, before Rabbi Shimon passed away. So there it talks about the different Asiyas, and the Asiyas are split up into different Moitzais Hapeh. The different technical, I think you call the points of articulation or the places of articulation. Yeah. So you have different groupings of letters, and then you have the grouping of Aleph, Ches, Hey, and Ayin, which come from the throat. Acheme Hagorin. But Ois Ches, what does it say regarding Ois Ches? Different thing how the different letters are produced. It has an expression there about Isches, Kovish ba'asha v'golid berucha. So Kovish here means it's compressed, or it's like you have the lashon kivshon ha'esh. You have like a furnace. It's called a kivshon ha'esh. Lashon kovash. Kovash means to press down, to tread on, to press. So here I think it means Kovish ba'asha. It's compressed in fire, for golid berucha, and then it's set. Golid lashon, like frozen, like glida, right? Golid, it's set and fixed. Berucha, with air. Which is going to explain what relevance that has to us here. V'hainu, this havas ha'oisiyos hu al yedei the kovish ba'ashachli. How do you create the oisiyos? How do the Oisius become Oisius Murgoshim? I think, what is the Zayah trying to explain? It's trying to explain how different letters are produced. So he describes it as Kovish Ba'asha. That there's this Aish is associated with Gvura, right? So to produce the letters, there has to be a process of Gvura. Because in order for the Oisius to become Oisius Murgoshim, Oisius Bebechinas Yesh, has to go through a phase of Gevura. Okay, so that's just the associating with a Maimer Razal. But Yuvan Zeh Aderech Moshmi Masheroyim Ba'adam. It's also worth pointing out in this whole section there is a tremendous amount of use of the term Onuroyim Masheroyim Ba'adam, Knira B'chush. on Royim B'chush, it's a huge reliance on sort of the human and the empirical experience of a person, how these things function. So you have to, you have to appreciate the mashal well. You have to be convinced of how this works by Adam, because mibsari achzalika, and then we can appreciate when we're talking about Isius Lamaila, it's all a nimshal to this. So Yuvan Zadech Moshe Mashirein ba'Adam. When a person gets a new idea in their mind, when the idea is first comes and emerges and you're conscious of a new awareness of something, at that moment of initial awareness, there aren't any oisius. Meaning that you couldn't name it, you couldn't label it. So sort of, when you have your eureka moment, you need to write it down. You need to somehow get to a point where you can, because otherwise it will go away. The Barak HaMavrik, this sort of flash of lightning of an idea that's going to come to you is unsustainable on its own. Doesn't have the oisius, doesn't have the kalim to be sustained, to be anchored. You just have a sense that you get something. You're learning something. Could be you're learning something and you're trying to figure something out, and you realize you're onto something. You get it, but you haven't yet. You couldn't at that moment articulate in any words, not just in dibur, or not just in ksiva, even in machshava. In your own machshava, you don't have a formulated sentence or of how this haskalah, how this idea could be formulated. So immediately afterwards, when you use your koach habina to fully understand it and analyze it, then you're able to have an awareness of osius in this haskalah. All this is all in machshava, right? In machshava, you can put sentences, you can put language to the concept that you're trying to conceive. So the question is, so that is a process that most people can identify with, right? There's usually a moment of that is unarticulated in words or letters, or symbols at all. It's just a self-awareness that you understand something, and then a process by which you can try and give it a body, in a sense. It's like something to contain it, a keli. Yeah. So that is that an experience? If we don't have that experience, then we're going to struggle with this mashal. Anu roin ba'adam, masher roin ba'adam. Is that something you can identify with? Okay, good start. So he asked the question: V'yesh lahavin eichu mayin me'ayin noldu b'chinas oisius. Where did these letters come from? Now, what would you answer, having learnt Ranat till now? Where did those letters come from? Weren't there in Chachma, in the initial stages of this Haskalah Chadosha? All of a sudden, you sat down and you spent time analyzing and taking it bit by bit, and all of a sudden you have sentences, words, structure. From the Keich Maskell. Keich Maskell is the Sherish Haisius.
Sherish Habina. Sherish Habina.
Sherish Habina. What is that?
It's got its own Sherish separate from Chachma. So even if in Chachma it's not sustainable, it has its.
These Haisius, right?
Right.
I think we're talking about something very real. That you have let's try and make it as very bland as possible. You have a mathematical question, you have an equation. You look at the equation, you initially don't understand it. So we're not even going to talk about, let's say it's, in order to make it better, it's going to be algebraic. So it has letters, it doesn't have numbers. So we want to use Osius, right? You're playing around with these Osius. in this particular equation, and you can't get it, and you're having you're fatif. You're deeply analyzing this thing, and then you get it. You feel like you've got it, right? You have a way of working out this equation, and then you have to quickly do your calculations till you can spell it out. What would be the solution to this equation, right? So you might do it by writing down, but let's say you're doing it in your head. You don't have a pen and paper. You're doing the equation in your head. When you first had the solution to the equation, the OCS of the equation, in this algebraic equation, you did not have in your head. It was only afterwards, when you methodically went through it, you were able to put the OCS to the Haskalah Chadasha. Where did those OCS come from? We have to answer Eich u'mi'ayin noldu b'chinas ha'OCS. This is our question. What are you going to answer till now, based on what you know till now? Where do OCS come from?
I'm sure. What do you mean?
It's not from Seichel Kadmon?
Not what they like from the Chachma, no?
Amid Ches.
Yeah.
Uki Yedua. The Sheilah Sha'asius Heim Bechinas HaKeseh Shalamayla Michachma Ubenefesh Ubechinas Atmis HaNefesh Shalamayla Mikecha Chachma Shebachar. V'lechein Ha'asius Hadibei Machrichim Eskeich HaMaskil Lavi Begilui. Ki Gamash Yesh Liskalis Mikeich HaMaskil Misad Atzmi Ari Miskalim Misad Hechrich Asius Hadibei. Yeah? That was our conclusion in Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah. So again, I ask you, what would you answer? Yesh Lavan Eich u'mi'ayin noldu b'chinas ha'OCS. Where did the OCS come from?
From Kesser.
Okay, but in Nefesh, Atmos Nefesh, yeah?
Yeah.
Are we asking, to clarify, what are we asking over here? Are we asking where OCS come from?
Well, clearly not, if you know where they're from.
Look at the question. You need to understand the question. Yesh Lavan Eich u'mi'ayin noldu b'chinas ha'OCS. It's not asking where the OCS come from. We've already said where OCS come from. OCS come from Etzem Neshama. Nefesh Malaya OCS, right? The question over here is Eich u'mi'ayin noldu b'chinas ha'OCS.
How do they come apparent?
How do they develop? From the Etzem Nefesh. Okay, very nice. The Etzem Nefesh has OCS. What is the process by which OCS are possible in Nefesh? If you think that everything is Oid, everything is Seichel, so we have a Lavush called Dibur. We have a Lavush called Machshava, right? Machshava doesn't, they require OCS. But there's it's not like there's this particular reservoir. There's this external reservoir. Where is it coming from? What is the process by which the nefesh, which is Malay Oisius, but they're not Oisius Mugoshim. They're not Oisius, even Oisius Amachshava, which are not Mugoshim in the ordinary sense, but they're Mugoshim the Atzmai. They're maybe not Mugoshim the Zulas, but to yourself, you have Oisius Amachshava. You have a mode of linguistic sensibility in your mind. Where does that come from? Mi'ayin eichu mi'ayin, not eichu mi'ayin noldu ha'isius. We want to know, how are they born? How do they emerge? We know where they originate from. That was the whole emphasis in Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah. But now we want to know, how do they emerge? You understand the question?
Yes.
Good. So, if you're a person who's able to experience this process in the self, where you can have a moment which is bli oisios, you have a consciousness of or an awareness of a state of being where there's no oisios, which then develop into oisios. So how do you track that progress? from pli oisius to oisius. So he says like this. He corrects himself in a sense. He clarifies. We said before that when you have the haskola chadosha b'chachmosei, or he didn't correct himself. Yeah, no, sorry, that's not correct. He's clarifying himself because there he says ein nirgosh bo adayin oisius klal. There's no sense of any oisius at all. But in truth, he says, even when you're in a state of askola, in the Keich HaChochma, before it came to Binah, koidim shabodi de asok of Abana bebinah, hayuba gam came bechinas oisius. It's not that the oisius weren't there. Ela shahayu behelim lei begilui. It's just that they were behelim, they weren't begilui. It's not all of a sudden, yesh ma'ayin, the oisius, hamachshava, which a person has in Binah, weren't there. Those oisius weren't there in Chach. It's not a creation yesh me'ayin. Rather, they were there before as well. They're just the behalim. And now, when they come to Binah, they come begilui. The oisius nikorim mamish. They're not able to be oisius nikorim. They're not perceivable oisius. And it's only when the haskalah comes itself, because the haskalah itself is in a state of helam, in the chachma. Once it becomes begilui with spashus yosef when a person comes to use their koyach habina, their understanding, their analytical mind, not their creative mind. If you think of Chachma as the creative mind and Bina as the analytical mind, in the process of analysis, it comes begilu. What happens? In order for your creative genius to be able to be analyzed in your analytical mind, there needs to be a tzimtzum in your creativity. If you're just constant creativity, it's very hard to concretely contain and decipher the concepts that being produced in your creative mind. So there needs to be a tzimtzum in the Eira HaSkala. In order to get to the point where you can take this concept and you can analyze it in Binah, which if you remember from the first Maimah, we talked about the process of oimek, of oirich, reichev, and oimek. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So different ways in which something can be analyzed to the point of it being thoroughly elaborated. Shom niglu ha'isius. That's when the oisius become revealed. The noildu and are born me'elam l'gilu yes b'mehus b'fnei atzmei. From Helam to Gilus. It's a Gilu Helam. The oisius were always there. What changed? The Oir is more mitzumtzum. Once the Oiris are more mitzumtzumim, then the Oisius are able to be more nikorim, negoshim in the self.
So he's making the Oir more mitzuyar.
Mitzumtzum.
Also,
well,
he's adding more detail to the Oir.
Yeah, but sort of, what's the horse and the cart over here? The Oir has to be nisamtzim and be nisalim to an extent. Has to be a tzimtzum in the Oir to get to that stage.
So it's consistent with the before that it's partial the gabi the key.
It's not just gilui. You have everything is. We're talking about Oir, so we're talking about gilui of a sort. But the gilui is b'derech nekuda. And it's not just gilui, then more gilui. It's not just unraveling gilui. What really is happening is, in the Oir itself, there's a tzimtzum in order to facilitate the next phase of hishtalshlus, of emergence. Here we're not talking about Lamaila, we're talking about in the person himself. For a person who has you know yourself, when you're learning something and you've got a problem, and then you think you figured it out, you have to stop, contain that idea, work it through before you can. If you're constantly new idea, then you have nothing. The whole thing gets. In order for it to be effective, to be nishtalshul, in the sense of, or in order for the ideas to develop, which is their ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is not to be stuck in chachma. You want it to become emerged. It can be to achieve what it's the tachlis and the purpose of the idea. So if you just let the idea just go and be created all the time, and there's no analytical tools being used, then you're stuck with just lots of floaty ideas that aren't really useful. They get lost. Yeah? So it's an important awareness. We've already established that the Oisius have a Sheirish Kodum. They have a Sheirish Kodum from Etzem and Neshama. That's not our question. Our question is where do they emerge from? They emerge from the withdrawing of the Oir, which is the basis of our theme, what we're trying to say over here. That through the tzimtzum of the Oir of Zah, of the Mashpia, then the Oisius of Malchus are able to be Oisius Murgoshim, and are able to be Mailim Master to even greater extent. Be Mailim Master Legamri. They can do the next phase. But how they even in the first place born to be so distinctively set up to be able to be kalim and be magbil the oy to such an extent, and be mailim u'maslim the oy. V'hamoshul b'zehu k'moi hamayim shekolu gamkein gamkein mikol adalad yisaydis. The moshul from this, for this, we're now going to have a moshul on the moshul, right? Because we're talking about Oisius HaMachshava, fundamentally, in what we've said here, this biur. We're going to give a moshul on this from water. The water is made up of all the four Yisaydis, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer. Imkein, Ish Gamkein, Ofer, Mamash, Kol B'Hamayim. You have the earth element in water. If you look at a glass of water, you don't, this is from a very dirty source, ordinarily you wouldn't notice any sediment, maybe under a microscope, but you wouldn't see any floating, anything floating there, right? It would just look like a clear glass of water.
Is that the white stuff which you get on the side of the
No, that's just
limescale?
Limescale. I'm just talking about a normal glass of water. Normal glass of water is made up of lots of different things. But when you look at the glass of water, you don't see it. It's not raki ilu, ain't sham rak mayim levadi. It seems like there's only water. It's just a glass of water. If you were to boil up the water, you would separate, and you'd be left with that's limescale, whatever. I mean, I'm not sure what the thing that might be reacting with the metals. I'm not sure, but you would be able to find a residue after you've boiled away and evaporated the water. But you nikodim and negoshim, and then it will be noticed. Yeah. This is in the Pardes explains why in the Sefer Yitzir doesn't mention amongst the Yisodis the Yisoda Offer. The Tiras the Ima Yos Yisoda Offer Yisod B'fnei Atzmei V'u Yisoda Ta'ale V'Komokim Is Avusei So Inim Iskal Lusei Shalei B'Metzias Dov B'fnei Atzmei While Yidei Gim Yisodis HaKeid Mishkol Tchila B'Helem B'Hamayim Ve'Ein Nikah V'Achakach Al Yidei Ha'Eish Yisoda V'Samayim Nir V'Nigla Ha'Offer V'Avi V'Mumusa Mechaber Hamayim V'Eish Chuli. Okay. So in the Pardes he explains this, that you don't have to mention the Yisoda Offer, because the Yisoda Offer is emerges out of the other three Yisodas through the boiling up of the water, and the Ruach serves as a sort of a mamutza between the water and the fire. Okay. you're not direct. It's the hot air that is boiling up. Umavuasham, the chenu beinin atzilus. So the same idea can be applied, or this paradigm can be thought of also in regards to atzilus. Kuli nichlo begimon chalakim avim mayim eish ein chesed gvur tferes. Upulas amalchus hipulas mukeves mishloshtam. But what is atzilus? Atzilus is primarily the ikka, the body of atzilus is chesed gvur tferes. And the role of malchus, which will be the comparable to the Athar, because Malchus is the Isis, the Daimim, is sort of like functions as a result of the other three. Probably means Reish and Beis. The Ramaskal Bereish is Reish and Hey. Yidush b'chinas yisayda afa shabatzilus u'b'chinas eisiyah sha'eisiyah im b'chinas daimim v'al ze'am sh'b'chinas yiskalas v'yisavas yisayda afa u'me'amayim al yidei avi v'eish u'pirush shemitchila hoye b'chinas afrudis kolu b'chinas amayim rak shaloi hoye chelkei afa nikorim klal chuli kadish martichim eid hamayim v'eish as mispartim chelkei afa u'me'amayim v'nasim dov mifnei atzmei. Okay, so we're just applying this we're saying that what is the offer in relation to Atzilus is the Isis HaDibur, the Isis of Malchus, because the Isis of Daimim. And just like we're trying to explain over here, how do you get the Isis, how did the Isis HaDibur of Malchus, how do they emerge? They emerge through the Tzimtzum, the Gevura, the Eish of Zah. And just like in water, that through this process of Eish and the Mayim, you're able to see the emergence of the Afar, so too the emergence of the Isis HaDibur of Malchus is made possible by the Eish, the Eish and Ruach and Mayim, the Meziga, the Hakava of those three, produces is Noiled, the Isis of Malchus. Never forgetting the Isis have a Sherish Kodem, and that's a whole different thing which we're going to need to keep in place for the final act in the hemshekh. But for what we're discussing over here, how do you get the emergence of Isis HaDibur in a person? When we're talking about Isis HaMachshav in a person, it's through the Tzimtzum Ha'ira of the Keich HaMaskil, of the Chochmah, of the Askola Chadosha. How do you get the Afar of the Mayim out of them, even though it's there through the boiling it up, it's able to emerge? How do you get the Isis HaDibur of Malchus Tatzilus? It's through the Tzimtzum of Zah. Yeah? You see, those are the pieces we're putting together. Not much has bori yet, but we're getting there. So we can take the moshel of the Mayim and apply it back to the Nefesh, which we were discussing in the initial paragraph of the page, and also apply that to the Mailah. So we often associate Chochmah with Mayim. So it'd be like this. Chochmah is, the Isis are not Nikarim. Just like in water, the Afar is not Nikar. Bina is associated with Eish. It constrains and is magbil, the Eira Chochma is able to divide it into parts, so it can be a coherent concept. In that process, the Oisius, which were Behelam in Chochma, now come Begilui. And in the Nimshal, what is the Avir? The Avir is Das, which is the process of combined Das, is Moshe Kashris, it's Mechaber, the Chochma, and the Bina. So they work in tandem, so you don't have someone who's just exclusively creative and someone who's exclusively analytical. You can have the two merging as complementary faculties. This is what it means in the Zayah, which we quoted from the Idra the Kovish ba'asha v'galid berucha, that there's a process of compressing it in fire and then forming it in ruach. When we say kavish, the pirush is the idea of something being compressed. Shu b'chinas eish ha'gavuris. That's achieved through the idea of eish and the union of gavura. This riful yabish as b'chinas hamayim u b'chinas ha'oid l'chachma, to burn and to dry out the water and the moisture of the oid ha'chachma, shle'iskala oid k'meshu, such that the oid should not be able to dominate. The creative mind of chachma should not dominate to the point where a person's incapable of having any analytical process. So as yotzim, so once that tzimtzum, the kavish ba'asha, is achieved, as yotzim miskalim ha'oisius me'enim lagilui, the oisius which a person has, the oisius ha'machshava, the way to think and label the ideas that are floating in the person's head, they are able to emerge b'chinas oisius mugoshim in a self-conscious way. Oisius mugoshim, self-conscious oisius. Remember, the oisius are there in the chachma too. It's just you're not conscious of them. You're not aware of them. They're behelim. In order to be oisius mugoshim, conscious, the oisius which you're conscious of, that has to be through a tzimtzum and a concealment
What
of
are non-conscious oisius? What are non-conscious oisius?
the oisius that are in the chachma.
Was that behelim?
Behelim. Yeah. You aren't conscious of them. You are unaware of them. They are concealed from you. When we call them moving, the sibus yesh, and this is the key line, sibus yeshus ha'oisius u'bechinas tzimtzum ha'oid. So the whole point, what we're going to be explaining now, is this process. That through tzimtzum ha'oid, it makes possible the yeshus ha'oisius. Okay? So next year, well, as I say, it starts the next paragraph. We're going to understand this, but derech prat yosa. We're going into much more detail, especially in the moshel of dibur, of exactly. Till now, we've been talking about oisius hamachshava. We're going to now see how this plays out more specifically in oisius hadibur, because oisius hamachshava, even though they're conscious, you're conscious of the oisius, right? You're self-conscious that you have oisius hamachshava. And you can think something, and it can, and there's a way of labeling it with words and letters. But still, as we define the major difference between oisius hamachshava and oisius hadibur, the oisius hamachshava are beheder hayeshus. They don't really have much of a yeshus. You're able to think something that would take you what you can think in a short time. It take you much longer to speak out, or for sure to write out. So they're not quite. So much oisius b'chinas yeshus, and we're trying to understand oisius b'chinas yeshus not in bina, trying to see the oisius hadibur of malchus, real oisius hadibur which are ma'ilem u'masti legamri. So how do they emerge? How does that function? And that's going to be what we'll discuss next time. Be'ezus Hashem.